Vice President J.D. Vance has just landed in Israel, joining Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff amid growing fears that the fragile ceasefire is already unraveling. Hamas has violated the deal, of course, and the next move may come with Trump's full backing. Is renewed war inevitable, or is a hidden power play unfolding behind the scenes? This is Israel Undiplomatic. What if we could protect Israel with lasers, drones, robots, and cyber technologies? We can. Every day, groundbreaking research from the Technion Israel Institute of Technology is transformed into real-world defense tech that safeguards Israel and saves lives.
Shalom, I'm Mark Regev, and welcome to another episode of Israel Undiplomatic. And as per usual, I'm here with my co-host, Ruthie Blum. How are we today, Ruthie?
Hi, Mark. Well, we're pretty good. And today, we've decided to try a slightly different format. And that is because we've got to talk about Trump's 20-point plan and what's going on with the vice president and Witkoff and Kushner. And so what we're going to do here, since Mark and I are in general agreement, we both support this deal. But since Mark is a greater optimist than I and much more diplomatic, he's going to talk about all the positives that we're seeing right now. And I'm going to take the devil's advocate position and discuss the negatives. So, Mark, let's begin. And you tell me what you think about J.D. Vance's press conference yesterday with Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. And it was in Kiryat Gat, actually. What did you think that his message was, and whether it's good or bad for us?
I think he was, of course, talking about how important the deal is and how this is a pathway forward, and it's not going to be easy, but it's the only way. And that's the message of the president. That's the message of the United States. And I accept that message. And I think the most important thing to remember at this stage is we got all the live hostages out. And despite all of Hamas's terrible things that they're doing, we got more than half of the dead hostages out as well, and more will come. And it wasn't that long ago when most people thought that was going to be impossible. To get a deal where our military is still in more than 50% of the Gaza Strip. In other words, we didn't have to withdraw. We're still on the ground there. And we got all the hostages out, the living hostages, out front. I think it's an amazing deal. Now, we had an issue earlier this week, a very sad piece of news. 2 soldiers were killed by Hamas. And Israel responded, right? And for one day, Israel hit targets all across Gaza in response to Hamas breaking the ceasefire in a very violent way. And I personally felt, because these 2 young men were, first of all, from the community I live in, from Modi'in. And the second thing is they were in the unit that I used to belong to, the Nachal Brigade, which I served in when I was a much younger person, yes. But Nachal used to have, maybe they still do have, a special framework for immigrants. And I, as a young immigrant, went and, it was the natural thing to do. So, it was a terrible day, but what we saw in the Israeli response, because we didn't have to worry about the lives of hostages being held in tunnels, Israel was freer in our military response than we would have been otherwise. We were very careful, especially in targets in Gaza City, because we knew there were live Israeli hostages under the ground. And in other places too, but mainly in places like Gaza City. And as a result, we had to, the certain targets we couldn't hit. That's no longer there. And so I would even say, let's say it all falls apart tomorrow. Let's say the ceasefire falls apart tomorrow and we're back at war. I hope it doesn't happen. But we're nevertheless in an advantageous military position because there are no live hostages in Hamas's hands, which gives Israel greater freedom of movement, freedom of action.
Okay, no, that's absolutely true. So let me tell you what I didn't like about J.D. Vance's message and about Witkoff and Kushner's interview on 60 Minutes a few days earlier with Leslie Stahl. Now, J.D. Vance said, and I accept everything you're saying here, but what he said was something. Let me paraphrase it. He said, "Yes, these two sides who hate each other, we've got to work together. It takes time because when you have these two sides who hate each other, now, excuse me, these are not two sides. Hamas is a barbarian terrorist organization, bloodthirsty, bloodlusty, radical Islamist organization. All it does is kill and maim and talk about jihad. Israel is a democratic, liberal state. Those two entities are not comparable. It's not, the two sides just hate each other. No, there's one side that is global jihad, is Muslim Brotherhood, and wants to openly annihilate Israel and the Jewish people and Christians and infidel Muslims. So I cannot stand that kind of equation. That's one thing. The other thing is that both Witkoff and Kushner, in their 60 Minutes interview, they talked about Israel's attack on Hamas targets in Doha and Qatar. And we know now that attack, though it didn't kill all the leaders there, it succeeded in scaring both Hamas and Qatar. It made Qatar turn to the Trump administration and say, we're vulnerable here. Give us an umbrella, a protective umbrella. You need guarantees. And in exchange, they also then finally put actual pressure on Hamas. And that's how we saw Hamas finally come to the deal and finally release the 20 living hostages all in one fell swoop. So the fact that Kushner and Witkoff said, we felt betrayed by Israel when we woke up in the morning and found out about that strike. So to use the word betrayed about Israel, it was very annoying. And the other thing they did that was disturbing, or Witkoff did this, he said that he met directly with Hamas. Okay, maybe there was no choice, but he met with the leader of Hamas in Doha, whose son was killed in the Israeli strike. And what Witkoff said to him was, I know how you feel. Let's commiserate because my son, I also know what it's like to lose a son. And why was this upsetting? Because Hamas promotes martyrdom for jihad. Its school books, everything it does, teaches children that they should sacrifice themselves for Allah. Of course, that doesn't mean this Hamas leader wanted his son to die. But this is not comparable. They teach their kids to kill and maim and to say, I sympathize, your son was killed in this strike, and my son, after all, that his son wasn't killed. His son, well, he was killed by a drug lord. I mean, he was killed by an overdose of drugs, and that's very, very tragic. But to commiserate with this Hamas leader, so I found that offensive. However, I was even willing to give them the benefit of the doubt that they needed to wink at these post-war Gaza partners. So now I'm going to ask you about that.
Can I respond? I want to respond.
Yes, no, I want you. I want you to. I want you to tell me why it's okay. But I also want to say now I want you to say why it's okay that Qatar, Turkey, and Egypt are playing such crucial roles in this whole post-war Gaza setup, you could say.
So I want to say the first thing, you talked about, Hamas and the culture of martyrdom, and it's all very true. But I know, and a lot of Israelis who follow Hamas very closely for years will tell you, that the Hamas leadership is very happy to send other people's children to become suicide bombers. They're very reticent to send their own children. In fact, why is this child with the father in the Gulf, living in 5-star hotels, maybe getting a very good education, and so forth and so on. In other words, there's this contradiction. Hamas leadership can be as corrupt as other Palestinian leadership. And the fact that they look after their kids and they're happy to other people's children become suicide bombers and other people's children to become human shields for their war machine, not their own children, heaven forbid. You remember the video of Sinwar escaping the tunnels with his wife and family, right? They look after their own families. So to say that a leader of Hamas wouldn't have been upset that his son was killed, and the son once again wasn't in the front line, he was in Doha because the father was looking after him. And so I don't think it's equal, but then I would go to another issue.
One sec, before you go to the other issue, just to let me clarify.
Yeah.
I didn't say that he wasn't upset that his son was killed. He may very well have been.
Yes.
But for Witkoff to commiserate with
him. That I'm getting to now.
Because you know what? That guy, he deserved to die, and so did his son, who was part of Hamas, and so did everybody sitting in that meeting in Doha. So now you go ahead.
No, go ahead. Now, sometimes in politics and in these negotiations and in any negotiation, you sometimes have to say things that you don't want to say. And I'll give you an example. It's clear to get this deal, Netanyahu had to eat, how do you say, in humble pie, and he had to apologize or express regret to the leaders of Qatar for the Israeli strike, and that was a necessary element in getting our hostages out. And I think Netanyahu made the right decision, because if by saying this he got 20 live Israelis out of the Hamas dungeons in Gaza, it's a price that he can pay. And I can also say that if Witkoff has to smile and be nice to a Hamas leader as part of the negotiations, and that's the price to get the deal. The only thing is, and here I raise it with you, why talk about it afterwards with sort of, there's an issue there. But once again, I think the bottom line is that in this case, words are used. I don't think anyone has any illusions about Hamas. No one has illusions. The words are used, and maybe in the West some people have illusions. The Arabs definitely don't have illusions about Hamas. But the words are used in this case to bring about a desired outcome. And so Netanyahu expressing regret, I don't think he really believes he's not sorry. Let me finish, though, one other point on this. And the same with Witkoff. I'm willing to give them the benefit of the doubt that their words were utilitarian. Their words helped us get to the release of the hostages. And to do that, I think the words were effective, and I accept that they needed to say things that they wouldn't normally say. What I do think needs to be said about the attack on Hamas in Qatar, first of all, and we said it on the program, Hamas can't have a hiding place anywhere. If you're a Hamas terrorist, you can't have a safe sanctuary anywhere. If you're in charge of killing Israelis, in charge of killing Jews, you should expect the Jewish state will try to hunt you down. That goes back to Golda Meir after the Munich massacre of 1972, and she sent the Mossad out to kill all the people involved, right? That's part of our culture, and once again, it's important for them to know. You're involved in targeting Jews, you will pay a price. I would say about that attack, I heard from a very reliable source that, remember, the Qataris had, after the Israeli attack, 2 or 3 days later, they had all the Arab leaders, everyone came to Qatar to express solidarity, and that was the public message. I know that one of the leading people in the Gulf met one-on-one with the leader of Qatar and said to him, this attack happened because you brought Gaza to the Gulf. In other words, you yourself are to blame. And maybe Qatar finally understood that it's not immune, that Qatar can't play all sides off each other and host Hamas and smile to the Westerners. They understood the continuation of this war, their relationship with Hamas is a problem. And I think you can make a very serious argument that Israel's strike on Hamas, though we didn't succeed in killing all the Hamas people we wanted to, which is a pity, that at the same time, that strike was a moment that catalyzed Qatar to suddenly get serious about putting pressure on Hamas. And once again, like the words, in this case, a military strike was crucially important in getting the deal and getting the hostages out. One last point, because I know you want to respond. Witkoff And Kushner spoke about it in a way that I think was difficult for Israeli ears on the 60-minute thing. But they also said it was a game changer. It got everything shaken up and energized the work towards getting the deal. And so even if it was a surprise to Washington, even if Washington wasn't happy, at least they admitted that it was an important step on the way to get a deal.
Okay, so first of all, let's just clarify something about Netanyahu's apology. It was not an apology to Qatar. What he said was, we were not aiming at Qatar. We were aiming
Yeah,
at Hamas, and we regret having killed a Qatari guard. That's what he apologized for. And it's important that we say that because he was able to, I would say, satisfy the Trump administration and yet not apologize for something that was actually legitimate. And by the way, I don't think that Kushner and Witkoff stressed enough that that was the game changer. Okay, because what they said was it set back the negotiations. They said the opposite, and that is a lie. Okay, so let's say, give them benefit of the doubt. I wrote a column saying, you know what? Okay, they were winking at Qatar. But now let's talk about whether, now, thank God, the President Trump is always in the background posting on Truth Social. And why thank God? Because no matter what these other people are saying, J.D. Vance, Witkoff, Kushner, whatever they say that sounds to me like they're in La La Land about radical Islam, about jihad, that this is a religious war, that this is a war to annihilate Israel and the Jews. This is not any old conflict, okay? Trump then comes out and posts on Truth Social, okay, listen, if Hamas doesn't disarm or doesn't do what it's supposed to do, it's in violation. And if it doesn't, we're gonna eradicate it. I mean, he keeps them on track, is what I'd like to say. His language is not theirs. Okay, his language is not diplomatic language, and that's the only thing that's been reassuring me because, as I said, I do not believe my issue here now is that the partners that the Trump administration says, great, let's have them all join the Abraham Accords. You have Turkey, you have Erdogan, who says that Israel has to be destroyed. You have Egypt that has not only over the years, now Israel has a peace treaty with Egypt, but over decades, it allowed materials and weapons to go into Gaza to help Hamas. And today, even today, with the situation now, with the war supposedly ending or over, however you want to word it, Egypt, there are hundreds of drones flying over from Egypt into Gaza. It's on film. It's been reported. People down at the border are saying, what are we going to do about this? Drones supplying new weapons to Gaza, to Hamas in Gaza. That's number one. Number two, Hamas, because of this, we're waiting to get out the rest of the dead hostages. And that's one of the reasons we're not like sealing the tunnels with like cement or whatever. There's some kind of material that you can do without blowing up the tunnels. You can also flood them with this material that expands, is that we want to make sure that we get all the dead bodies out of there. But that Hamas, with every passing day, not only is Hamas still got weapons, still got tunnels, it's walking around executing any Palestinian who doesn't agree with it. And that's not to say that they're also executing other militias, they're executing innocent people. Of course, the world doesn't give a damn about that. So they're building their reputation and their strength again. And there's even talk of their playing some kind of role in administrating post-war Gaza. So here is where I say Americans and Westerners, don't be in La La Land about who these partners are. Qatar is a bad actor. Turkey is a very dangerous bad actor. And Egypt is, I think those drones are it's probably more corruption and money that's involved with people doing that. But this is not a peaceful group.
So you are correct, because both Qatar and Turkey have been traditional friends of Hamas and the Muslim Brotherhood, and they've given them moral support and financial support and logistics support. And there have been issues. There are serious issues. I have no illusions about them. I think, though, as part of getting the deal that got our 20 hostages out, it's fair to say that the Americans managed to get both of them, the Turks and the Qataris, to put pressure on Hamas. I think that was the game changer. And here I would say, as we go forward, that this will only work, this process will only work if everyone keeps the pressure up on Hamas. When Trump said if they don't disarm, they'll be obliterated, that's very important because they're supposed to disarm. They're not going to do it because they want to do it. They're not going to do it because they've suddenly become humanitarians, that they're suddenly Boy Scouts. Yes, no. These are bloodthirsty terrorists. They'll only do things when there's amazing pressure on them to do it. And it'll be very interesting to see how their friends, Turkey and Qatar, were willing to put pressure on them to agree to the ceasefire and release the hostages. Will they continue to keep the pressure on as we implement the next stages of this deal? And the jury is still out on that. For their own reasons, they played ball to get the ceasefire. Will they continue to play ball with President Trump as the deal has to be implemented? First of all, we're still stuck in stage one. Let's be clear. We still have about a dozen Israeli dead hostages that, according to the agreement, should have been released in the first, 3 days? And that's well beyond. It's interesting. Hamas said they couldn't find any more. Israel got tough and suddenly they found some more. It's possible that there's one or two, I don't know, that you really can't find for all sorts of logistic reasons. But we can see that, every day we're getting two. And as long as that continues, that's good. But until they're all out, Hamas is in violation of its commitment. And Israel, we stay where we are in Gaza. We've got our positions. We're still there. And as long as these people haven't been found, there's no obligation for Israel to do anything. And I thought it was very clever. I think if Hamas shoots at us, we have to respond with overwhelming force like we did after the 2 soldiers were killed earlier this week. But if Hamas is doing nonviolent things, like not releasing the hostages, the dead hostages, which is a violation, we therefore can do other nonviolent things in response. We don't have to have crossings open. We can keep some crossings open and others closed. We have all these leverage within the deal that we can use, because if they're violating the deal, everyone has to understand. If they're violating the deal, Israel doesn't have to keep to its obligations. That's ridiculous. Israel should only implement its part of the deal if there's, Hamas does what it's supposed to do. Now, the second part of the deal, which we're not there yet, but which is being talked about, Hamas has to disarm. Now, that's crucial. Why? Because what is the Hamas game plan? And I think we spoke this on a previous episode. They want the Hezbollah model in Lebanon, where they are the people with the guns that everyone is scared of. And though there'll be some formal government which won't be Hamas, they'll have the power behind the scenes. That's what they want. It's clear. But the minute you say they don't have the guns, then they can't do that. And that's why what President Trump said is very, very important. And it remains to be seen. To see a terrorist organization voluntarily disarm would be almost, I think, unprecedented. Right? Today, Hezbollah is fighting for its life, but it's still fighting for its life. Right? It's greatly weakened, but it's still fighting for its life. Hamas is greatly weakened, and you're 100% correct. They want to rebuild themselves. They want to rearm. They want to reestablish their control. And it's up to us and the Americans, and theoretically everyone who is part of the 20-point agreement, to make sure that that doesn't happen.
Right. But my problem is, let's say it does happen, okay? Let's say we disarm Hamas. I'm talking about the other actors, the Palestinian Authority. It may not have any role in Gaza. Qatar, Egypt, Turkey, these are bad actors. I am talking about after Hamas. And I have what I'm saying is you're absolutely right. They have to pressure Hamas. And what they get out of it is American protection. But I mean, my concern is this la la land peace talk. Oh, peace is busting. It takes, as J.D. Vance said, we have to do it step by step. He's right. By the way, he's right about that. Nobody yelled at him the way they yelled at Netanyahu when they said, what about post-war Gaza? What after the war? And he kept saying, wait, let's first win the war and then we'll discuss it. That's all true. My problem is not that we have to take this slowly. That's not my problem. My problem is that it sounds as though these Americans do not know that as good as they are at making deals and as good as they are at putting pressure on the bad guys, they do not understand that this is part of global jihad against the West. It's not only about Israel. It's not only Hamas specifically. As I said, it's also Fatah. It's also Islamic Jihad. It's the Palestinian Authority also has to be eradicated, but even if it isn't, it certainly cannot have a role in post-war Gaza. So my concern is treating this as though we're only dealing with Hamas, and we're not.
So I want to respond to that. And here we've had a disagreement in the past, and we have a disagreement today, because I believe the Palestinian Authority is not a real partner in peace. The way they support terrorism, they refuse to accept the legitimacy of the Jewish state. They're corrupt. They're dictatorial. They're highly problematic. But I do distinguish between them and Hamas. Once again, Israel has security cooperation, may be limited with the PA. We don't have it with Hamas for obvious reasons. It's the same when you say Turkey. Now, the Turkish president has said outright anti-Semitic things, and he's been terrible, and he's done terrible things vis-a-vis the Jewish people. On the other hand, 2 years ago, no, more now, 2.5, 3 years ago, he hosts President Herzog in Turkey, rolls out the red carpet, and says he wants a new relationship with Israel. And he meets Prime Minister Netanyahu at the UN, I think just before October 7th. It was, let's stop for a moment. In other words, he is an Islamist, but once again, I distinguish between him and Hamas because he has different interests. Now, what was very interesting to say when I think the Vice President was asked about it at his press conference, yes, if Israel is against Turkish troops in Gaza, and the Vice President said the American position is Israel has to agree to all the foreign troops if there will be in Gaza. But I think it's all a bit of a, how do I say it? It's like it's something everyone talks about, but it's really important. No matter who the foreign troops are in Gaza, they're not going to fight Hamas. That Israel has to do, right? There can be diplomatic pressure on Hamas to disarm, but the Egyptians and the Turks and the Qataris are not going to send troops in to disarm Hamas. It's not going to happen. That's what we have to do. So if Hamas, and I think President Trump put it very well, either Hamas voluntary disarms as part of the agreement, which they are theoretically committed to doing, and if they don't, I think it falls upon us to do it.
Oh, absolutely. By the way, and we expect it of ourselves. Our only problem is that we get our hands tied. My concern is, and this is what I have faith in President Trump about this. My concern is that when we have to do it, when we have to blitz them again, every time we have to do it, again, there's criticism and our hands are tied. I'm not expecting other troops to do it. Just let us do it without bringing the wrath of the so-called international community down on our heads and all this business about humanitarian aid and all that.
Can I give you the good news?
Yes, good news.
After the attack by Hamas that killed the 2 Israeli soldiers earlier this week, and Israel gave a very, very strong response. Yes, we hit targets across the Gaza Strip, Hamas targets, and we hit targets we hadn't had before, precisely as I said, because the hostages were no longer there, and Israel could target places we didn't target in the past. And it was a massive response. And if you were listening to the international media, Israel was killing and all the usual stuff, Israel is indiscriminately blah, blah, blah. Not true, but they say it. The Qataris and the Turks didn't condemn Israel. And that's very interesting because they knew that Hamas had broken the deal. And Hamas said, we didn't know about this. These are people out of our control. Rubbish, right? If Hamas people are shooting Israel, Hamas is at Israel and killing Israelis, Hamas is responsible. They can't say, it wasn't us. It's another part of Hamas that we don't talk to. It doesn't work that way in the real world. They shoot at us, we will shoot back. We will answer fire with fire, and we will, to use a word that the lawyers don't like, we will hit back with disproportionate force because you've broken the ceasefire. If the ceasefire is off, the ceasefire is off. But the fact that the Turks and the Qataris didn't condemn Israel for our response, which in the past they would routinely condemn us, right, shows that maybe they have made commitments to the Americans, that their pressure on Hamas was not just a one-timer to get them to sign the deal to release the hostages, but they will be there, not for Israel, but for the United States as this process goes forward. And as I said, this process will only succeed if the pressure remains on Hamas to fulfill what is it obliged to do. We will provide the military pressure, but they have to provide the diplomatic pressure. Now, will it actually happen? Remains to be seen. But that's the pathway forward.
Well, one thing that I can say that we know, and by the way, Turkey, yes, whenever it made a gesture, it was before October 7th. And anyway, Turkey, Erdogan is not to be trusted in any shape, in any sense. He has his sights on Syria. He wants to be the ruling force in Syria. He's a dangerous guy. That whole, he is clearly trying to get on America's good side. He has been, by the way. It's not he's trying to. He has been on America's good side. Excuse me. And he has to. His deals are now not only about Hamas and Israel. He has his sights on the larger Middle East and his dream of annihilating Israel. And as I said, Egypt, I don't think, and I think Egypt has accepted that Israel's here to stay. But my point is that post-war Gaza, I see this deal as a really good thing because it finally puts the onus on the enemy and not on Israel, as previous deals have done. And I think that's a great thing. Although we did release monsters into Jerusalem and Judea and Samaria and Gaza. We released monsters into there. And so we're all in danger now. And I was against that part of the deal. But okay.
But you can. It's part of the deal.
Got it. It's part of the deal.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is I don't believe for a second that this is the start of peace all over the Middle East or that it's the end of this war. It is temporary and it's necessary. And thank God Israel is in a stronger position because of weakening Iran's nuclear facilities, because of basically toppling Hezbollah, because of everything we've said, of decimating Hamas, and because we have the friendliest administration in Washington in history towards Israel. So we're in a greater position. But if you think I believe for a second that this is all like peace, love is coming our way, I don't believe it for a second.
So I finally agree with what you say. Yeah? Everything depends on Israel being strong. Israel showing itself in the last 2 years to be the regional superpower, not a global superpower, but the regional superpower. That gives us respect from our Arab neighbors. That puts fear in the eyes of our enemies. That's a good thing. We're not going to have, some sort of situation where there's love and, we all have, a kumbaya moment here in the Middle East. No, this is all about realpolitik. I think the realpolitik is working. I think the ceasefire will hopefully hold. It might be a long, worn out process. But I think the ceasefire also gives us opportunities with other Arab countries, with other Muslim countries to expand the circle of peace. I think I wouldn't be surprised, yes, if this ceasefire, I don't know how it's going to turn out in Gaza. I think there are many, who knows. But if the serious fighting in Gaza is now behind us, which is possible, you have a situation, I believe, where we can open doors with important Arab countries, and here President Trump will be crucial. He says he wants to expand the Abraham Accords. He has the leverage. Him and Netanyahu can make it happen.
No, I agree with you, and I just would like to make one last point. At this moment, it feels as though the Arab states, as much as they've had enmity towards Israel, are better than Canada, Australia, and Europe. I mean, you have the Canadian Prime Minister saying he's going to arrest Netanyahu if he comes to Canada. So I have to say, maybe the truth is, maybe we can count more on the Arabs than we can on the West.
So I will finish with one philosophical point because I don't want to go over time. But people say to me, there's so much anti-Israelism in the West on campuses amongst, right-minded people. Yes, that Israel is a terrible place here. I think actually the answer to a lot of that is not in talking to the West, but if you have peace deals with the Arab countries, then how can people in the West, maybe they can, but they'll look stupid. They're going to be more anti-Israel than the Arabs. Just think about that, Ruthie, and we'll discuss that more when we meet next week.
Looking forward to it, Mark.
Likewise.